Hello and welcome back to my kitchen. So one thing I really wanted to do before the craziness of summer is to meal prep some things for the freezer. This was actually something I wanted to get into the swing of during winter months, but I just kept putting it off because I had extra time. And now that I've been spending a good chunk of time in the garden, the last thing I want to do is make dinner and prep extra things when I already have a busy day. So today, in the next few days, I plan to prep various things for the freezer. I want to do burger buns, English muffins, I want to do enchiladas, and a bunch of other prepped things such as chicken fajitas and things like that, just so I can easily grab a few things throughout the week over the next month or two to help ease the burden of dinner. Last week when I was really getting the garden planted, I just really remembered how much I hate cooking dinner late at night, especially when I've just been in the garden for hours on end. During summer, I am in the garden constantly. I'm harvesting stuff. I am literally prepping food and putting away food. And if I don't have to think about dinner, snacks, breakfast items, that would be great. So over the next few days, I am going to be prepping a handful of things. You guys did just see I am currently prepping some chicken broth. So here's a little hack for you. I currently don't have any chicken broth canned, but if you plan on using chicken in any type of meals and you need chicken broth, get a whole chicken. You can save money this way by making your own broth. It cooks the chicken for you and then you can shred it up. So I'm actually going to be using this chicken that I'm making the stock with currently for enchiladas, and I need the stock for enchilada sauce. So I'm kind of killing two birds with one stone there. So hopefully this will give you some inspiration, especially if you are getting into gardening, to maybe prep some things for yourself, because the last thing you're gonna wanna do is think about dinner when the weather is nice outside and you have a garden to tend to. So I do have a various stack of different recipes I would like to get to over the next few days. I will make sure I link a recipe down below if I use a recipe, or if it's my recipe, I will link it. But as far as the broth goes, this is typically what I do when I can broth anyway. So I put a whole chicken in the stock pot, I topped it with water, added some herbs and spices, and I'm gonna let this simmer on my stovetop for the next 2.5, 3 hours. I will strain it and then I'll have the broth ready to go. I'll let the chicken sit aside and we'll let that cool and shred it. I probably won't get to chicken enchiladas today, but I do want to get to some of the prep work as far as marinating meats go. So I'm gonna do some chicken fajitas, I'm gonna do some teriyaki chicken, stuff that can just easily go into a freezer bag and be thrown into the freezer to dump into a crock pot. I tested one of these recipes last week and I really liked it. The fajita one was really good. So I'm gonna do that. I really wanted to find things that were easy that I could either pull out of the freezer, throw in the oven, or throw in the crock pot in the morning. Again, to make my life easier. I don't want to be thinking about dinners. Here's what the chicken looks like in the pot, and now I'm just going to start chopping some veggies for our crock pot freezer meals I'm throwing together. I'm going to make 2 batches of chicken fajitas. To each bag, I'm adding 1 large onion and 3 bell peppers all sliced, and also some garlic. Then I'm adding 3 chicken breasts to each bag. I have this taco seasoning that I love that I will be using, and adding a few tablespoons to each bag as well. Then I got everything sealed up. I like to use a straw to get out as much air as possible. This will help with any freezer burn. One of these days I'll actually get a food saver. Now I'm moving on to barbecue chicken. This one is a really easy one. I'm just placing a few chicken breasts into each freezer bag and then topping with my favorite barbecue sauce. I added around a cup to each bag, and I also made 2 of these as well for some easy barbecue pulled chicken sandwiches. Lastly, for these easy freezer crockpot meals, I'm going to do some teriyaki chicken. I also chopped up some onions and peppers for this, topped with 3 chicken breasts, and added my favorite teriyaki sauce and also some tamari. Now I easily have 5 meals for the freezer that can go into the crock pot. So now that I got some of the easy crock pot situation, marinated meats done, I'm gonna jump to chocolate chip cookies. So one of my favorite things to do is make some of the chocolate chip cookies and then roll the rest in the balls, pre-freeze them, and then throw those into freezer bags. And then I can just take out a few cookies at a time, bake them from frozen, and you have fresh homemade cookies whenever you want. It's like one of my absolute favorite hacks when it comes to cookies. I started doing this, I want to say 2 years ago now, and it's a game changer. Ever since I was little, I have always made the Toll House cookie recipe, and that is what I'm gonna do today. So I'm just getting 2 sticks of butter, and then I do need to make some brown sugar because I am out. So I'm just adding 3/4 of a cup of cane sugar to that, and then I'm gonna add 3/4 over here, and I'm gonna make my brown sugar real quick. Bought 50 pounds of sugar from Azure last fall, and I really like it. And then I've just been lazy about buying brown sugar, and I always have molasses on hand when it comes to doing like random things with the chickens, like my chicken block treat. So I am just starting to make my own brown sugar. I think I did this with you guys a few weeks ago now that I think about it, but you just mix up your molasses with your sugar and you create your own brown sugar. Doing the cookies like this is great because it is just me and my husband. So for us to go through a whole batch of cookies before they really don't get as fresh tasting typically won't happen. And that was why I started to freeze about half the batch each time, if not more. And then I was just taking a few cookies out at a time when we would drink tea at night and make cookies, and they are just so great. I love this little hack. I will say, if you do take the cookies directly from frozen, add like a few minutes to your cook time. So these cook at 375 for about 9 to 10 minutes. When I take them from frozen, I will typically bake them for about 13 to 14 minutes. I do watch them, but that's typically the time span there. So I just did a teaspoon of molasses, and that consistency looks good. Last time I did about a tablespoon, and it was just too dark of a brown sugar for me. I like a little bit lighter of a brown sugar. Let's toss that in there, and we're gonna start mixing this. I do already have my oven preheated, and the chicken broth has around like 30 minutes left before I need to pull out the chicken. So now that the sugar and the butter is combined, I'm just going to add 2 eggs. And then I'm also going to add a teaspoon of vanilla extract. In a separate bowl, I'm gonna get 2 1/4 cup of flour, and I'm going to mix that with 1 teaspoon of baking soda. The recipe does call for 1 teaspoon of salt, but I actually never add salt because I use salted butter instead of unsalted butter. And all I'm gonna do is turn that on and slowly add in my flour. And then once all of that is combined, I'll add the chocolate chips. Here's our dough, and then I have a cookie sheet here lined with parchment. I'm just gonna take a tablespoon and do a heaping tablespoon and dollop it onto the tray. This is the tray I am going to be baking off of, so I am gonna spread them out about 2 to 3 inches apart. That's what my heaping tablespoon typically looks like. I like a little bit bigger of a cookie than what is suggested in the recipe. I'm just gonna cook 8 of these and get the rest on the other tray for the freezer. So these are just going in the oven for about 9-10 minutes. And while those go, I'm gonna get my other tray all set up. So when you are doing these for the freezer, you do not need to worry about any type of spacing. We are going to be pre-freezing them to where it doesn't even matter because they're not getting baked at all. This is also so nice just to have in the freezer in case you have any type of guests come over, and you can always just have fresh chocolate chip cookies on hand. All right, and these are just gonna go into my downstairs freezer for the next like 2 hours or so. I'm gonna eat one of these hot, fresh out of the oven. So good. My timer went off with this. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and turn off everything. Let this sit for a second. I'm gonna take the chicken out once I'm done and let that cool, and then I'm gonna strain the broth. Okay, so with this, you do wanna be really careful getting the chicken out of the broth because typically the meat wants to fall off the bone at this point now that it's been cooking for a while. So you wanna make sure you have a good grip on the bird. I like to take some tongs. Oh, see, there it goes. It just broke in half. And just get what I can get and then place it down. It's all falling apart. Oops. And once this fully cools off, I will go through and shred up the chicken, make sure all the bones are out and all of that. So I'm just gonna set this aside for the moment. Now I have a glass bowl with a fine mesh sieve, and I also have a cheesecloth on here. This is just gonna make sure that any impurities are out of the broth, and I'm just going to pour this through. I do like to make sure I clip my cheesecloth down just to make sure nothing's fallen in. And now our broth is all strained out. And now we have plenty of broth for some of our other recipes. If you've never made homemade broth, it's so easy and it tastes so much better than anything store-bought. And like I said, it's pretty much a free product if you just buy a whole chicken and make it yourself. Look at all that yummy broth. Here I am shredding up the chicken once it all cooled down, and I'm packing up my cookie dough for the freezer as well. All right, it's the next day, and before I get started on enchiladas, I'm going to start by prepping 2 batches of English muffins. I really want to make 4 batches of English muffins because 4 batches will get me a little over a month's worth of English muffins. We typically go through about a batch a week. I really wanted to get this in particular in the freezer because this is something I make like every other week, every week, and I don't want it on my to-do list. So I'm just gonna start getting the dough all ready so then that can sit while I make the enchiladas. I do have a full recipe for my English muffins, and you guys have made it. I've had a lot of good feedback on it. They are so good. My husband made the comment a few months back because I got really lazy with English muffins, and I bought a batch from the grocery store just because I didn't feel like doing it that week, and they just taste so much better, and it's so much cheaper to make your own, and it's really easy as well. I'm also going to make burger buns, but I really don't think I'm going to get to burger buns today. I might get to burger buns tomorrow. I just don't think I'm gonna have enough counter space or enough bowls to allow multiple rounds of like muffins and burger buns and things like that to rise. And English muffins are one of those things that if you don't have a stand mixer, it's going to be tricky because it's a very wet dough. I've personally never tried it without the mixer, but I could see how it would be very hard to mix by yourself. There's not too many things I feel like you need a stand mixer for, but English muffins I feel like are definitely one of those things you do. We eat English muffins for breakfast a lot. It's also really nice just to have on hand or in the freezer because you can easily cut them up and make like little pizzas out of them if you're like in a time crunch. So now that everything is combined, I just want to show you how wet of a dough that really is and how tough that would be to mix. So now that our dough is all mixed together, I'm just going to take some more butter and kind of butter this bowl a little bit and then plop the dough in. And we will let this rise for about like the next hour or 2. But I'm going to go ahead and get a second batch of this dough going. Now I'm making a second batch of English muffins real quick before moving on to the enchiladas. All right, so I am going to make a double batch of enchilada sauce since I'm doing a double batch of enchiladas. And I really like the recipe from Preppy Kitchen for enchilada sauce. It's super easy. It's really good. I really enjoy it. And making your own enchilada sauce versus just buying it is, again, really easy. So I do need to grab the broth I made from yesterday. So what I'm gonna do is get this warm and I'm gonna add 6 tablespoons of butter. And what you're gonna do is allow the butter to get hot, and then we're gonna mix all the spices in, add the broth, add the tomato sauce. You kind of wanna cook those spices down. And his recipe like has a bunch of different seasonings to it, but I personally just like to use the taco seasoning that I used yesterday for the fajitas. This works great. It's what I've used all the time. I'm typically someone that uses my own herbs and spices, but when it comes to taco seasoning, I really like this one. This is one of those things where I'm going to be using like 6 tablespoons of this. All right, so now that all of the butter is melted down, I'm just gonna go ahead and add my 6 tablespoons of taco seasoning. And now what I'm gonna do is get this whisked up into the butter. We're gonna let this kind of cook for about a minute or 2. His recipe does use oil. I typically use butter for almost everything now. All right, to this I'm gonna add 1 whole can of tomato sauce. And now I'm going to take 4 cups of the chicken broth that we made yesterday and add that. All right, now I'm just gonna let this cook for a few minutes, let it come to a boil, and then reduce it down to a simmer. Super easy. I do think with the rest of this chicken broth, I might actually make a batch of chicken pot pie filling to have in the freezer. Now I need to go downstairs and grab some cheese to shred. I love buying bulk cheese from Azure Standard because it's significantly cheaper. A block like this will cost me about $4.50 if I buy it in bulk, but if I were to buy this from the store, I'm looking at like $8. If you are someone that buys pre-shredded cheese, just know it typically doesn't melt the same. That is one reason why I like to just shred my own. It doesn't take that much effort. Here's all my stuff for the enchiladas, and now I'm going to start assembling them. I start by adding some sauce to the bottom of each pan. I take a tortilla and spread some sauce on it before adding some cheese and shredded chicken and rolling it up and sticking it into each pan. I do use flour tortillas. I've been told that corn is the traditional way, but I am just not a fan of corn tortillas. Once done, I top them with some foil to help protect them while in the freezer, and then I place the lid on top. Now I'm finishing up my 2 batches of English muffins. I get them all cut up using a 3-inch biscuit cutter. Each muffin goes into a cast iron pan for a few minutes to toast on each side, and then back onto the pan to finish cooking in the oven. I do this at 350 degrees for 7 to 8 minutes. I let them cool before packing into bags, and while they were cooling, I actually went ahead and did a 3rd batch of English muffins. I didn't end up doing a 4th. I was honestly kind of over it at that point, so I only did 3 that day. I am getting started today a lot later than I anticipated, but I am going to start with burger buns today. I'm going to do a double batch of burger buns. So the recipe I'm using for burger buns has been one I've made for a few years now. I've never tweaked it. It's so good. It's a recipe from Joshua Wiseman. These burger buns are amazing. I started to look for burger bun recipes when I started to be really picky about my breads. This was one that I made once and then I never bought burger buns again. It's a very simple recipe, but it does take some time. So I am going to start with buns today. And then the other thing I really want to try to get done today is making a lasagna. We'll see where we're at. It's already 1:30, so I expect me not to get too much done today. I don't even know how to pronounce this word. We all know how terrible I am at pronunciating after last week, but a tingzong. It starts with that. Either way, it's a milk, butter, and water mixture that you heat up, and it creates this paste. This is something we need to do first and let it cool, because once we mix everything with the yeast, if this is still hot, it will kill it. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna make a double batch of buns today. My plan is to actually make hamburgers tonight for dinner. So for this, I'm just starting with 120 grams of whole milk. I am adding 54 grams of water. And then lastly, I will be adding 40 grams of flour. Now I'm just putting it onto the heat, and this is something that I will mix together, and every minute or so I will go through and mix it until it forms a paste. One thing I really like about Joshua's recipes are, I believe majority of them go off the gram. I haven't used too many of his recipes, but the ones that I have, they always turn out really, really good. And again, this one's been a staple for a few years in this house now. They turn out so yummy. This is the current consistency of everything. Those little chunks I've never seen really matter, so I really wouldn't worry about that too much. So after about a minute, you can see how it's getting thick and pasty now, and now everything should come together pretty quickly now that we're getting all of this paste. And you can see now we have our little paste mixture ready to go. Cool this off a little faster. I am gonna go ahead and take it out of the hot pot and just place it into a bowl. And once it cools down a little bit more, I'll just stick it in the fridge to get it cooled down so we can go ahead and get it used up. In the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and get other ingredients ready to go. So I got my milk measured out. I'm gonna go ahead and measure out my flour real quick. So I did 640 grams of flour. I'm gonna add 70 grams of sugar to this. Add our salt, 14 grams of salt. And I'm gonna go ahead and slightly heat up my milk just for 20-30 seconds. Get my yeast blooming. Yeast is one of those things that I have found does not measure out well gram-wise, so I will be using, how much am I using? 2 tablespoons since I am doubling the recipe. And then I'm just going to wash a few eggs. I believe I need to grab 3. This is cooled off. I'm gonna start getting everything mixed together now. I also have 6 tablespoons of butter that I didn't mention. I'm gonna start by adding in my milk and my yeast here. I'm gonna add my tenzong, whatever it's called, just in scoops at a time. And now I'm gonna slowly add 1 egg at a time. This is something I change up. It does call for 1 egg and 1 egg white. I am doubling the recipe, but I'm just gonna do 3 whole eggs instead of doing egg whites, just because I don't really want to separate an egg. And once all of that gets incorporated, I'm gonna add about 1 tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of butter at a time and get all of that incorporated as well. And while that incorporates, I'm gonna go ahead and get a bowl and butter the bowl for our dough. And we're gonna put the dough in this bowl and let it rise for about 1.5 hours. I actually like to turn the light on in my oven to make sure this is a nice warm area to help everything rise up. I will say I have frozen these buns and they have done so well. Typically when I do this, I like to make a double batch. That way I just have burger buns ready to go. This was one of those things that I really wanted to have in my freezer for barbecue chicken sandwiches or just really quick and easy hamburgers. You can easily toss some hamburgers on the stove real quick and have a dinner really easily if you have buns on hand. And here is the consistency of the dough all mixed up. just gonna put a lid on this and set it into the oven with the light on and set a timer for an hour and a half. And while this hour and a half is going, I'm gonna go ahead and get a meat sauce all made for some lasagna. All right, I went and got some tomato sauce from the basement that I canned up from the garden last summer.
For my meat sauce, I chopped up some onion and got it all cooked down, and then I added 2 pounds of ground beef to the pan and got that cooked. I added my onion back to the pan, and then I added in my sauce. I ended up only using 1 quart jar for this. Then I moved on to prepping the ricotta cheese mixture for the layers. I shredded some mozzarella and parmesan, and I added that to my ricotta cheese, and I also added 1 egg and got everything mixed together and then into the fridge.
All right, my water is coming to a boil for the lasagna noodles, and I just checked the burger bun dough and it has doubled. So what I'm going to do now is actually shape the dough. So I have my scale here. I'm going to actually weigh out the dough in between 95 and 100 grams. I'm going to shape them, get them on the pan. I'm going to space them out about 2 to 2.5 inches apart, and then I'm going to cover them for the second rise. So this is a good little time to do that. Sorry if you hear my dishwasher. I'm trying to keep up on dishes, but I also have my sauce for the lasagna cooling, because when I put the lasagna all together, I really want everything to be cooled. That way when I go to put it into the freezer, I'm not having any more extra steam causing any type of freezer burn or anything like that. I did give my scale a nice little cleaning because I am going to put the dough directly onto the scale here.
To shape the burger buns, I take each side and I fold it onto the center and I place them onto the counter and roll them towards me. This will help create some tension and also a tighter ball.
Here is what they all look like. And now I'm going to get these covered and let them double. So when it comes to letting the buns double, I like to just get any type of deep pan. I typically use my glass ones, but they're in the freezer. And then just flip over upside down and then put a towel over that. All right, that should be good. And then I just slightly dampened this towel and I'm gonna set it over the top of everything to make sure nothing dries out and everything can rise just fine.
To finish up the lasagna, I cooked my package with noodles, and once it was cooked, I strained the water out and rinsed with cold water to stop the cooking process. Once everything was cooled off, I assembled the lasagna, layering the noodles, the ricotta mixture, and the meat sauce until everything was used. I did add some extra mozzarella to the ricotta layer each time, and I also topped with more mozzarella at the very end. I added some foil on top just like I did with the enchiladas, and I got it all covered with the lid, and into the freezer it went. At this point, my buns were done rising, and I brushed with an egg wash, and they went into the oven to bake, and here's how they turned out. I do really like to toast these with some butter in a cast iron pan before I make anything with them. It just adds like an extra layer of flavor to everything.
All right, we are here for another day in the kitchen. This is the last thing I'm going to be doing this week to prep. So one thing I wanted to do was have some pie dough on hand in the freezer, and tonight I'm gonna make chicken pot pie. The chicken pot pie filling recipe that I've always used really does fill 2 pies, so I wanted to go ahead and make that tonight, freeze the other, and then I was just going to do 2 batches of crust. That way I could just pull out crust and then pie filling, throw it into the fridge, let it thaw, and throw together a pot pie really easily. I don't want to put pie pans in the freezer. I made that mistake. Gosh, when was it? It was a few months back. I had a glass Pyrex dish, and I don't know what happened, but it wasn't even frozen, but my glass Pyrex dish shattered. Oh, that's what it was. I took it out of the oven and I placed it onto my glass top stove. My glass top stove was apparently just too cold, and the whole thing just shattered while I was making a pie. So that was tragic. So I didn't really want to throw any type of pie dish like that into the freezer or anything like that. So I'm just going to make some pie dough and some pot pie filling. Again, I'll make sure to link any type of recipe that I use down below. I really like this pie filling recipe. It's really easy. So let's just go ahead and get started. So when it comes to making pie dough or any type of pastry that uses super cold butter, I personally like to shred the butter. It incorporates a lot easier. I will still use a pastry cutter, but this just allows everything to mix together really easy. So I'm going to be making 4 pie crusts. The recipe does 2 each, and you need a whole 2 sticks for 2 pie crust. So I like to do an all butter pie crust. I don't like to use any type of shortening or oil a lot of the time. If I can use butter, I typically will just use butter over any type of oil. So all I do is take the stick and I just shred it like I'm shredding cheese. And once I get this shredded, I am just gonna go ahead and place it into my freezer while I get other stuff mixed together. That way the butter can stay cold and get even colder, especially since my hand's probably warming up the butter a little bit with shredding it.
I got my butter all shredded and I started making the rest of the pie dough. To the bowl, I added 313 grams of flour, followed by 2 teaspoons of sugar and 1 teaspoon of salt. I also measured out 225 grams of water off to the side. To my flour mixture, I added my butter and got all that mixed together. By shredding the butter, this really takes no time. You want the butter to be pea-sized throughout the flour. Once it is, I added in my water slowly. Once everything starts coming together, I transfer to the counter and I start kneading everything together until it forms a dough. This can take a minute, but don't add any extra water. I promise it will all come together. When it does, I weigh it out and I divide it by 2 equal dough balls, and I get that all put away for later. I just use some parchment paper and then I place into a freezer bag. And once the first round of dough was all done, I moved on to the second batch and did the same thing.
I'm not going to be trying this today, but one thing I've actually wanted to do is freeze dry a few batches of chicken pot pie filling. I don't have enough on hand. That's why I'm just gonna go ahead and freeze it. It'd be kind of a waste of my time to freeze dry just one batch of it, but that is something I've really wanted to do because you can just reconstitute it with hot water and then you have something that's also shelf stable. So I do want to play around with doing some meals like that. I just wanted to get my freezer more so stocked for the next like 3 to 6 weeks to make my life a little easier. I just got everything prepped and ready to go as far as measurements and chicken and all that. So I did realize I don't follow this recipe exactly to the T. I follow everything minus she adds the whole little small onions, and I've never bought those. I just use the chopped onions that the recipe calls for. So I'm just gonna start by throwing a little bit of butter in this pan to get the chicken all cooked, and then I'm gonna get the butter into this pan and start getting all my veggies together. I am going to use up the rest of the broth that I made the other day. That was one reason why I really wanted to get this prepped and in the freezer as well, just because I didn't want to have to deal with that broth and I wanted to go ahead and have it all prepped for everything. But you can see how much broth you get out of one chicken and how you can incorporate it into a few different recipes. So I'm gonna get the butter in here. I'm gonna saute the onions up in the butter while the chicken is getting all cooked up. Just salt and peppering the chicken. I'm not gonna add too much seasoning or anything to it. I actually might add some garlic powder because garlic powder never hurt anyone. Nobody said pot pie was healthy, but it is delicious. Now that the onions are translucent, I'm going to go ahead and add the flour and get that all mixed up and cooked in for a few minutes. Our chicken is almost done, and I'm just going to take that off in a minute and shred it up once all of this is cooked into temp. But just getting the flour in and getting it all mixed up. Cooking it for a few minutes will get any of that extra flour taste out, and the flour helps thicken up everything later on. So now that the flour has cooked down, I'm gonna go ahead and add our broth in. Of course, like every measuring cup I have is currently dirty. I need 5 cups, and I am pretty positive I have right at 5 cups. Chicken is now done. I'm just gonna let this sit over here while I keep up with this. And now that all of this is coming together, I'm gonna go ahead and add in are peas and carrots. So I have 2 cups of freeze-dried carrots here. One thing I have loved, so this is from the garden last year, these freeze-dried carrots, and I have loved having the carrots on hand like this because they're clean, they're chopped, they're ready to go. I can just add them into soup, stews, or something like this where I'm making a full-on chicken pot pie, and they are so good. Freeze-dried carrots are honestly probably one of my favorite things I did last year. You can also do them in like carrot sticks, and they taste so good. They're just that perfect amount of sweetness that you want. And then I also have 10 ounces of frozen peas here. You can see at the moment how they are kind of just sitting on the top because they haven't absorbed any moisture yet, but I'll show you what they look like once they do reconstitute in this broth. All right, everything has now thickened up, and I got all of the chicken shredded, so I'm just gonna go ahead and add that in. And the only other thing I'm gonna do is add 1/4 cup of milk and add a little bit of salt and pepper. And then I'm gonna let this completely cool before I do anything with it when it goes into the freezer, which will probably take a while because pot pie filling always takes a good amount of time, but you can see just how much filling this really does make. The first time I made this, I really thought it was for 1 pot pie, and I had so much of it. I ended up just freezing it, and I really loved having pot pie filling in the freezer because it doesn't take a lot to make pie dough or throw something together. But when you're chopping up a bunch of vegetables and things like that, that can take up some time. All right, I'm just gonna get this off the heat and let it cool, and I will see you guys once it is. I'm so excited to eat some pot pie tonight because this looks so good. I'm just splitting up everything evenly, and I have the one in a freezer bag just so I could easily transfer it. So what I'm going to do with the freezer bag is pretty much close it majority of the way, and I'm gonna flatten out all of this filling to kind of get as much air out as I possibly can. This will help again with any type of freezer burn. And one little layer here. And then I'm just gonna close it up once I get all of the filling in. All right, and now this will go into the freezer for a rainy day, and this is gonna go into the fridge for tonight's dinner. Final lineup of what I got into the freezer was 2 batches of chicken fajitas, 2 batches of barbecue chicken, and 1 teriyaki chicken, all for the crock pot. I got 2 things of chicken enchiladas ready to go and 1 thing of lasagna. Both those things will last us multiple lunches and multiple dinners, which is really exciting. I got that 1 chicken pot pie, 3 to 4 weeks worth of English muffins. I got about 4 to 5 dinners worth of burger buns ready to go. And I also got a batch of chocolate chip cookies in the freezer. So there you guys have it. I'm really excited to have all that in the freezer ready to go. I do plan to go through that over the next few months to make my life easier when it comes to the garden and trying to juggle cooking food for lunch, dinner, breakfast, and snacks, you name it. So hopefully this gave you a little bit of inspiration to do that for yourself. I'm really excited to have that burden off of my shoulders and just know I have things in the freezer that I can grab and go over the next few months. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I will see you guys all in the next one. Bye.